Good morning, people. Okay, so fear is an interesting thing, isn't it? Fear in the media is an interesting thing. Years ago, I watched a documentary, well, not correction, not a documentary, a drama. It felt like a documentary called The Paperman. And it was basically about the rise of a sort of journalist hack who makes a bit of money, and then from that, he's able to buy a newspaper, and then he goes on to basically become a massive newspaper magnate. And it ends at the very end of it with basically the news of climate change becoming the big deal, and he's in a limousine as the rain's all raining down outside the window, driving to Washington D.C. And the gist of it is that he is there. The newspaper is no longer about reporting the news. It's about reporting whatever the agenda might be. It might be you want to promote a war, you want to promote a particular threat or whatever. But the gist of it was that media was increasingly becoming not an actual tool of information, reliable information that was part of the fourth estate that called the legislation, the judiciary, and the executive into account. I, now increasingly a lot of people, have this phobia against the mass media. And again, a lot of it's actually stirred up by tech companies who want greater control of the information flow. So a lot of that distrust of mainstream media is actually artificially induced to begin with. However, it doesn't actually deflect from the fact that we're now living in a world where 95% of all media platforms, 90% of all media platforms in the US are owned by 516 particular major corporate outlets. Any story we're now looking at online or in our mass newspapers, there is a gender filter on it. And that's in some ways the biggest battle that we actually face is that, a case in point today. Yesterday there was a big, a couple of days there was a big tsunami wave to deal on it. And the story in today was man surfs at beach and went after warning given. Now, I looked at the photo, and I'll break this down. I looked at the photo, and the guy, and I know Sumner quite well, and the guy's on his surfboard and he's out there by himself, or at least first step one. The way that the photo was shot, you don't actually know how many other people are on that particular wave. That is a close-up shot. They needed a singular surfer, so they picked that particular footage. We don't even actually know whether or not actually it's actual live footage or it's stock footage. Likewise, we're showing the waves in Kampanchaka, and I was looking at them going, and it was meant to be an 8.7, and when they had 8.0, houses were exploding, and I'm looking at these hills shaking, there's rocks falling down, and the seals are getting into the water, but there's no real it's not as dramatic as I'm making. But what again was, I'm not making any assertions, but I'm just looking at how things are presented, and the camera shot was very much of that was shown was a close-up footage. So we really don't have anything in that to give that footage either an idea about time of the day, what else was going on. So the footage that you're seeing is very selective. And again, on these climate change ones, you'll have this is one Ron Windindy, holding a microphone and there's wind blowing in the background. And, again, that footage will make it seem like, oh my God, that's climate change. But actually, you might find that, and I'm not saying, again, this is not about a video about denying or supporting climate change. I'm just saying, when you take a shot of someone standing in a windy waves crashing, and say that can be used to convey a story, but it doesn't. Once you bring the camera out, you actually reflect a full macro. So in this case of the surfer, the second thing was the lighting of the shot indicated that the shot was taken somewhere about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which again we don't know if that was actually the surfer or stock footage. That wasn't made clear. But what if we were saying that all that was, then it's like, well, you could have picked a better image anyway, because that meant that you were talking about that was taking place at an event 10 hours before the actual tsunami was due to strike. So the real story actually going on here is man did not go with a compliance. Oh, shock horror, rebel. And that's really what the whole point of the message was. The beach to make you feel bad. If the authorities tell you something and you don't do something, you're a naughty human being. Interesting time also was two things which I find very interesting about the 8.7 event, the timing of it. Now, we already know that there's an exercise taking place in Australia called Saber, Talisman Saber, that's right. It includes the Singaporean intelligence who've been over here and they've trained over here as well. And I think I've done stories about some of the things, weird things that happened when they were over here. But they're also, we've got a cyber hub that we want to set up in New Zealand, and then we've got a reciprocal agreement with Singapore, which is also happening. During there was announced was all signed with Singapore during that exercise. Now, why that's significant is that because Singapore fits the role in the Five Eyes intelligence apparatus, and they're actually not part of Five Eyes, they're more what they call the lesser club, Nine Eyes. And in this role, their job is to act as the social media police to quote unquote make a more harmonious society. So the point of that there is that they are able to use the control of information to effectively shape social behaviour. So that could be making sure that stories that actually point holes in the official narrative get pushed right down the algorithms versus all the people that are applying and doing exactly what they're applying, what the state wants them to do, all the influencers or whatever, they get pushed to the top. So again, this is an example of the state and our supposed democratic nations going out of the way to utterly inflate or shape the information that you are actually receiving. And again, like you look at the how many people will see this video. Maybe I'm just a really unpopular guy and I've got nothing really interesting to say. Maybe it's that simple. I accept that. But what I don't understand is that in 2015, during the Trans-Pacific Partnership, when I was pointing out that these TPA and these things like memorandums promoting, like in 2022, we also signed a memorandum basically meaning that if we have a natural disaster, the US gets control of all of our airspace and satellites, which is, also gives them the ability to gain control the information and dictate what we, the public, are actually getting access from ourselves. Not just, they can actually effectively shut down our own information source. That doesn't sound like national security to me. So in the event of these Five Eyes, these Five Eyes events, they can control that particular information, shut it down, shape what you actually want it to see. All of these is meant to be happening inside a democratic society. And again, we increasingly know that a lot of these Five Eyes organisations are actually being shaped or incredibly influenced by private sector. For example, Palantir to now have sworn members of the US military. So that's literally what you call a fascism. When you get a state private monopoly occurring, that literally is the definition of fascism, or corporate fascism at any rate. So the Singapore guys, they were doing they have the ability to effectively control information. We're now making that part of our news factor. At the same time, the other story that was coinciding, I knew there was something else I wanted to allude to. The other story that was taking place at that time, or the story that was being broken at that time, and I'm sure you'll see more and more and more of it, is the concept of managed retreats. And this effectively is a euphemism for the permission for the state, partnered with private interests, to effectively go in and seize people's properties and make a land grab. And we've also seen through things like Cyclone Gabriel, where that information that was available, which should have told people where the flooding, the forest flashing, it's not a case of shaping weather, it's a case of we had all the information. We paid for all this information. This incredible supercomputers to tell us where to build our houses and our storm drains. Yet it didn't filter down to the public sector. It filtered down to private interests. And then when all those events occurred, and it turned out that certain properties were allowed to build where they weren't meant to build, well, those properties are now going to be sold back to the government at 20 cents in the dime, who will then rezone that area and then sell it back to the forestry industry that caused the damage, who will then get to grow pines in that area to collect the carbon credits, because that's all been, basically our weather has been monetarised. And it's not about being for or against climate change. It's about, in this particular case, the response has been monetarised. So your ability to have faith that the decisions that are being made for genuinely environmental and public good have a big question mark over them because of who, when you follow the money, it's who is gaining from it. Increasingly, what we're also seeing, and I'll come back to Texas in a second, but increasingly what we're seeing is that a lot of the same people that are involved in the geoengineering game, and not just cloud seeding, but the dropping of ferrous metal, are also companies, and I'll come back to those in a second, but there are also companies that are involved in weather forecasting. And what we're having in the States, which will probably happen in Australia, which means it'll eventually probably happen in New Zealand, is that public weather forecasting, again, stuff that the taxpayers have been paid out for, has been retired, and instead what we're getting is weather forecasting by private interests who, again, they can control. I mean, this goes all the way back to the Mayans. If they had the priests had all the information about when the crops were coming, and then treated it like, filtered it down to the peasants and made it out like they had, they were in direct relationship with the gods, and from that they were able to get an unfair, excessive power balance. This is what privatising weather forecasting will actually do. And if you are able to use additional technologies, not to change the weather, because you can't change the weather, you can't cause earthquakes, but what you can do is you can ramp and amplify up existing conditions. And this is, again, the people that want to support climate change, they need to get into their heads that actually these extreme weather conditions actually provide an opportunity for those who are in this business, because those extreme weather conditions are much more easier to ramp up than standard normal weather conditions. I mean, we need to have a serious adult conversation. In the case of plankton where stuff's put into the ocean to also have effect on carbon sinking. Again, this is largely promoted via corporate media who are controlling the information, saying this is a really good thing. But when we look at companies like Gigablue, and go and look at the company Gigablue and have a look at the individuals behind it to begin with, and do a bit of independent research, and tell me whether you think these are come across as good, reliable people that you'd want to be in business with. Frankly, I think they read as sketchy as But what they want to do is they want to dump a whole bunch of stuff, and it's one of about a dozen experiments that have been happening between Tasmania and New Zealand in international waters, in unregulated zone, with very little information on the Australian corporate media or the New Zealand corporate media, about dropping basically nanoparticles into the ocean to create ocean fertilization, which can potentially do many, many good things. But at the moment, because we don't know enough, and the science really isn't in, it's just like warp speed. We're just going to go ahead, and then we'll say it's all good. And our public relations people say it's all good. And anybody that dismisses it will take out a photo of a surfer surfing when he's been told not to, and go, naughty, naughty, naughty people, as we slowly drip feed you. It can also cause terrible, terrible things. It can actually cause algae bloom. And that's very interesting because, again, when we look at Australia, all these areas which have been affected, their livelihoods have been affected, and businesses are going to get shut down and tourism sites are going to get quiet, which means that land will go up for cheap. See where I'm going with this? But the point is, we don't actually know what causes algae bloom. And you can see when you're reading the stories of algae bloom that there's some very, very scratching of heads there. I'm not talking about the people, there are people that want to immediately turn this into being, it's climate change. Then there's other people that are going, no, I think there's something not right here. And, let's go and see what the water testing told us. Oh, golly gosh, we're not actually testing the waters, so we don't know. And then they're sitting looking at each other going, I think it's about time we had a bit of an inquiry into about what's actually going on here. And they're not saying it, but you can read that somebody is getting that this is not correct. And again, you saw in Australia, cloud seeding was actually officially shut down over Australia in 2024 because, again, I think that's right. Again, after a few events happened, top of my list would be the cloud seeding event that took place over Dentworth River in Tasmania. Higher bodies looked up and started looking at what they were seeing and going, nah, something's not right. We're going to just shut that down. We're not going to say why we're shutting down. We're going to shut that down. But what's happening now, if you, for example, you go and do an Official Information Act again, and they're now hiring public relations experts to answer your OAAs, and they're getting very pedantic about it. So again, democratic society, but we're spending taxpayers' money on hiring spin doctors so that instead of you getting a straight answer about what your answer is and somebody answering honestly, they are finding people who are actually being hired to know how to deliberately, the key word here, deliberately deflect what you're asking. So in the IAA, for example, if you turn around and say, is there any chemtrails happening over in New Zealand? Well, the answer is going to be no, because first of all, the language that's used in all these official reports for these kind of experiments is not chemtrails. It's probably cloud seeding, or it's probably stratospheric aerosol spray. There's about a list of a dozen. You've got to know the language before you can actually know what to ask. That's your first obstacle. The second thing is, Right now, if we take into account, like, actually, you can go all the way back to 1954, Operation Crowflight, because this is when this whole process began. So all those cloud seeding, things that are doing right now, which again, the information you'd be saying, well, where was this technology developed? Where were the prototypes? Where was the experimentation? Where was the checking that this was actually working? All of this stuff didn't just pop out magically out of nowhere. Yet, according to the close-up of that information, that's what you're being asked to request, to believe. You're being asked to defy all common sense that an adult would occur and say this stuff just came out of nowhere. Not the case. But Crowflight occurred in the 1950s. There were a whole series of all sorts of other experiments happening, and I've done videos on this beforehand. 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, over New Zealand, over Australia, relating to atmospheric and this sort of thing. But in case of Crowflight, mostly a lot of the stuff was done in international waters, where, again, there was the room for plausible deniability, and the simple fact that we're not doing it now, so that our citizens have got no reason to be angry at us. If you do an OIA, and they say, no, we're not doing any cloud seeding in New Zealand, it's probably correct, because they will be doing it. And as the data, the scholarly, if you go, very cool keyword to add to your Google searches when you're looking up stuff is scholarly. Quite often, if you don't have it, you'll get all the drosh and all the crap. Scholarly will give you the stuff that's got the peer review and the actual meat and bones. So when you're looking at cloud seeding, you'll find that they're doing cloud seeding down in Antarctica. I'm not even sure that's legal under the various international treaties, but there you are, they're doing it. They're also doing it in the space between the areas, so that when you say, are you doing cloud seeding or stratospheric aerosol or whatever, they can say with a straight face, no, we're not doing it here because we're doing it out into international waters. Admittedly, we've picked weather conditions that we know that are going to blow it inshore, but technically speaking, we're not doing it over shore. It's all about the devil is in the detail. And the reality is, I guess the point of this video today is that people need to become more discerning in their information collecting, which we should be doing anyway. But we're very bright people, and we tend to get on the internet and we go out and we normally go and find the dots that connect to what we want to hear. And that's where, in some ways, the argument about social media is legitimate, But the reality is, what we should be doing, and if they were legitimate about stopping fake news, they'd be educating us to do this ourselves. But they don't, because it's not about, the reality is, what they're arguing about is not about fake news. What they mean is, does any news that challenges the official narrative and dares suggest that actually a guy surfing 12 hours before a tsunami isn't actually a news story at all. What you want to be doing is you want to find minimally 3 sources of information that can verify what you're saying. Ideally, you want to find that each of those information sources are coming from different networks that are not connected to each other, and ideally, maybe somewhere from radio, somebody from TV, maybe some from the National Archives. Because remember, not all information is also online. There's a lot of stuff that's in the archives which people tend to ignore. And again, at the moment, we've just witnessed in the last 5 years 1 million of our books, no list of what's actually been wiped out. We've been told all sorts of bollocks about, like first edition Jack Kilroy on book, very, very, very valuable book that went missing. And I suspect that was just somebody was enriching themselves. But right now, yes, 1 million books have been thrown out of our National Archives, and we're not getting a list of what's actually going. And that's really, really, really not good, because even if, like, for simple things, if the internet goes down or there are major events, we want to have hard copy backup material. This is the Orwellian destruction of history. You want to control people to destroy the history, and this is what the attack on archives are. But back to the point: 3 pieces of information, multiple different sources of information. Radio, online, National Archives. Going, maybe doing your own field research, but all those things. Then making sure, of course, that said that those informations are independent. They mustn't be like, none of them must be owned by the same people. Then you also need to work out quality of your information. So when Doug, who always sort of tells some interesting stories after he has a few beers, tells you a story at the bar without naming the sources, probably not such a great bit of information. One might even call that gossip. When, on the other hand, you can, from independent sources, verify with also different film angles, because there's a good example. There was a fire It was during one of the big newspaper guys had a pension thing going on. And instead of the story being about the fact that this guy had ripped off his own workers for their pensions, the story became about these riots that were taking place in London. Now, I watched that all night long, and for one reason. I was seeing all these smoke pouring up, and looking at all these people throwing rocks. And it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. They finally did a wide angle shot, and you saw there was one building on fire. That was the riots of London. But it was the way it was shot and filmed made it look like all of England was up in arms, and that was really a deflection from the main story at that time, which was the pension situation. So getting multiple angles when you're looking at a story is very, very, very important because it gives you context. Do you have other things like radar? Any form of magnospheres. The more actual power ability to collect raw data to actually gain back up what's been said by the state. Cool. Do you have mass witness reports? Do you have really good film footage? Photos and stuff that you can be, you can very much demonstrate why they have not been tampered with, like they've been extremely authenticated. So basically, the more sources of information you have that can be shown to be, the more verifiable and independable and authenticatable, the better information. And that's kind of what we have to do in terms of our SOS save. That's my new mantra: save ourselves. We need to become experts on understanding information. Quite often it'll be argued that, you don't understand the science. Well, quite often it's not an issue about understanding the science. It's about understanding the process and and how the information is presented. And quite often once you know that information, you know that actual strata, and you're able to demonstrate, what you will quite often demonstrate is the actual fact that what has been presented as science or the experts is not that. It's actually control flow of information, giving the illusion of expertise or academic endorsement, when in actual fact it's actually just simply more spin doctrine. Finally, the situation, of course, I'll just finish out with is the Wells COVID cause, in a lab situation. We still don't know that answer. But what we do know is that when we were told that it was the story presented by anteaters and bats, and what we know was that it was presented by a person that had a financial interest at the laboratory that may have been responsible. We know that the other people in the lab that were presented it also had financial connections to that individual, as to other people who then became the go-to source of information that media went to when they wanted to tell a story. And it turned out that basically he'd gone and asked all these academics to write this big letter saying, no, we endorsed it, it all came from bats. And it turned out everybody on that letter had a financial conflict of interest. And so at that point, the story fell down, not because it was ever supported by science, but because it was actually spun, and it was a question of the control of information to begin with. I've hoped you like this little particular video. If you like what I do, come along, subscribe, reach out 0221 954 323 with the email, and I'll tell you what's required if you want to be a subscriber. I don't just ask people to be subscribed. By the way, not everyone gets to be a subscriber. I have a client list of people that I want. I don't want to be an influencer. I have people that say, yep, I recognise that they're genuinely interested in what I have to say, and if they want to use me, as some people do, they quite often they're doing research and say, what do you think about this, or have you heard about this? And I'll turn around and I'll either have a quick look up myself, or I'll let them know from the stuff that's up in my head, and that's what they get, so that you don't just get to turn around and me just spoon feed you. It's a two-way relationship, and because I'm not really in the begging game, and I don't want to be an influencer. Thank you very much. This has Ben Vigent on Deadline TV.